Welcome to A Kind Life. Today I'm extremely grateful to have Damien Mander here. I would definitely say he is the man that turned me vegan and also a hero of mine. So thank you so much for being here, Damien.
Alicia, thanks very much for having me on and the very kind introduction.
Just the truth, no lies here. So Damien,
Dramas.
I'm sure much of my community would know who you are, but I guess just give us a little bit of your own introduction, I guess, from your sort of early years up until you moved to Africa. Like, tell us a little bit about yourself before moving over there.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm sure you can all hear I'm an Aussie. I've been away from home for a long time, and I think still tried to manage to hold on to the accent. But I grew up on the east coast of Australia. I'd be split between Melbourne and Sydney, and just grew up loving the water, loving the ocean, being absorbed in salt water and diving, whether it be free diving or eventually scuba diving as a kid, and then eventually had the fortune of turning that into a career with the Navy. Became a Navy Clearance Diver. The Australian military, and then later on to work with a small special operations unit with the Australian Army, and then abroad. 2005, I left Australia and have been making every effort to try and get back there once a year since. But as you guys all probably know much better than me, it hasn't been the easiest country to visit or get out of for the last couple of years. So to be honest, I haven't been home for over 2 years now, so I do miss it. I did manage to catch up with some family and friends recently from Australia, but it's how are you guys going? How are you going back there? How is it? Is it the way the rest of the world media is making out?
Yeah, pretty much. Unfortunately, it's a little bit different in each state. I'm in Victoria as well. You know, part of where your hometown was originally, and yeah, Melbourne. I think we were the most locked down city in the world. So yeah, it's been pretty hard for the last couple of years. But I mean, I think the thing is, it just depends on, almost what you made it. Like, a lot of people have used this time to kind of work out what they're really passionate about and make a lot of changes in their life, which is, a positive that's come out of it. But yeah, it has been a difficult time.
So yeah, it does seem a little crazy watching it on the news and speaking to friends back home, because I've spent much of the last 2 years being able to travel around the world, whether it be Europe, through Africa, a lot through the US, and seems like the rest of the world to a large extent just copped it on the chin and got on with life. And seeing what you guys have been through back there, for better or worse, who knows? But definitely. I count myself lucky to be in, for all the faults that certain people may pick out of the media for some of the places I've lived in and currently live in Africa, to be able to have the freedoms that we have over here, I'm extremely grateful for.
So tell us, Damien, how did you go from a sniper to starting International AntiPoaching Foundation?
Well, look, I operated with some of the most smallest and niche specialist units with the military, and I had an awesome time doing it. But when you're part of these units, you've got this sort of really tight knit group of people around you that are very highly trained, and they've got your back. It's like a brotherhood. These were all male units that I operated in, and it was these sort of small elite boys clubs, which we loved. We thrived, and we had mission, we had purpose, we had all the training and tools and support that we needed to be able to go out and do what we had to do. And then when that all stopped, because I went and spent a bunch of years in Iraq, 2005, 6 and 7, 2005 especially, when the insurgency was kicking off, and then by the end of 2007, I was sort of pretty burnt out, going on missions and feeling fairly complacent about the way we operated, and that wasn't really fair on the teammates that I was there with. And I'd done quite well financially by that stage in life, so it was time to move on. And I'd I was now 9 years into a military career, financially set up. There was very little that I could do from my own perspective within that military career in terms of a challenge. And I thought it was time for a break, time for a bit of a reward. And that for me meant a holiday. And that holiday was South America. I'd read a book called Marching Powder. And it was about a maximum security prison in San Pedro, the capital of in La Paz in Bolivia. And they said the best cocaine in the world was made there, inside that prison, and that tourists could pay to go and stay inside the prison. And I thought, time to let my hair down and go and party. And I did that, and I started in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. I finished 11 months later in Panama, having traveled up the whole coast of South America, and it turned into just an out of control downward spiral. And what I initially thought was this reward and time to relax. I wasn't using my brain and my mind at the time, and I'd lost that brotherhood around me. I'd lost mission, and I had no purpose. And as fun as it may sound, just being able to have this party and this sort of bank account that was sitting there, from doing very well financially, from my time in Iraq and my time in the military. Australia's a very well-paid military, but I'd also invested heavily in a residential property from a young age. So yeah, I just didn't really have anything to worry about other than where the next party was going to be. And yeah, as I said, that may sound attractive, but I think for someone that had been operating at a fairly high level, going from that to almost nothing in many aspects, in regards to purpose or mission. It unravels very quickly, and I've seen it with a lot of mates that have come back from tried to come back from similar circumstances. I see it a lot with the places I tour, whether it be in Australia for public speaking, and the issue we have with veterans there, and you're seeing what has now been announced as a Royal Commission, I believe, into veteran suicide, but also in America. We see dozens of veterans committing suicide a day, and essentially we're sent off as children, as young men that really haven't had a chance to experience life outside the military at this stage, and you're sent off to fight the arguments of old men in what is conflict or war. And then there's not really the mechanisms to pick up the pieces and help rebuild a life when you come back home. And for many people, when they hit rock bottom, they explode. And I suppose I was one of the lucky ones. When I hit rock bottom, it was a turning point. Time to figure out the what next in life. And I'd heard about conservation in Africa, and that became the next sort of, I'd say, adventure, is what it started out. Well, there wasn't really any purpose behind it other than looking for the next set of awesome pictures for my social media accounts.
Yeah, wow. I'm guessing as well, like a lot of people might have thought that, going over there is somewhat dangerous and things, but I'm guessing for you that was, second nature, and that wasn't really a concern. And probably, like you said, at some point it was almost like a bit of chasing a thrill.
Yeah, chasing a thrill is definitely the best way to put it. It was only going to be a 6-month adventure, and after coming from living in northern Baghdad for the previous couple of years, and operating outside the wire every day on sometimes 5 or 6 different missions a day, coming to Africa didn't really there was no real consideration for threat or danger, and that's just the I suppose the mentality that you naturally come to form when you're operating at that level. You're always on, and there is a danger in that as well, in being always on, because it can be hard to perceive threats when you become complacent to them. I traveled around the southern part of the continent over my first 6 months here in Africa. Went through South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, and eventually Zimbabwe, just looking at different anti-poaching units. And I was trying to get a foot in the door and a place to start a conservation, thrill-seeking adventure. I was looking for a fight, not a cause. And it was during these travels that I got to spend time with rangers. I got to see the struggles on the ground. I got to see the day-to-day challenges that they faced, and they were simple challenges in comparison to where I came from. Having worked with elite units, having worked in places like Iraq, where they were just throwing billions of dollars into this protecting resources in the ground, and then you come over and see rangers, these wildlife rangers that are protecting the heart and lungs of the planet that had access to virtually nothing. Nothing. You're talking about rangers that didn't even have boots to patrol in, or radios or ammunition for their weapons. They're going out and they're facing these armed insurgent-like groups. They had automatic weapons, heavy caliber rifles, operating in teams of more than a dozen in some cases, and they were out there trying to destroy nature, trying to kill elephants for their tusks, rhinos for their horns. And there's rangers that didn't have the right leadership or the right training, but they'd thrown their lives into this for a very small monthly salary. And that did a few things for me. It made me reflect on my reasons for being in Africa. And that for me was, deeply internally challenging confrontation, because I was there for the wrong reasons. But it also made me reflect on purpose and mission, and it inspired me to want to do something different with my life, other than just looking for the next adventure or thrill seek. And alongside what was happening in terms of my own internal interrogations, and being inspired by rangers, was also seeing what they were fighting for, and that was nature and animals. And that was also another sort of internal confrontation that I had, because I'd come from a position of hunting, a position of exploiting animals, as a heavy meat eater as well. I'd been paying someone else to do something to animals that I was no longer willing to do myself, or didn't want to do myself. Whenever I hunted after being in Iraq, I knew what it was like to be hunted. And then I saw this combination of inspiring group of people and what they were fighting for, and it was a time for me to make a choice in my life about what I wanted to do with the two things that I had. By the age of 29, I had a fairly good amount of money, and I had a certain level of skills that were, unfortunately, from my perspective, required to go out and help these rangers defend nature at the time.
And so would you say, I always remember the story I've heard you tell before about, coming across an elephant that had its tusks, like its face cut off, to have its tusks removed. Was that sort of the turning point for you, where you decided that was going to be your purpose moving forward, and you started IAPF?
Yeah, look, there's always a tipping point or a breaking point. The reality is we are a product of our past, and I'd like to think that, personally, one of my greatest strengths that I am grateful for is the ability to evolve and to use past experiences to draw upon. And by this stage, I had a different lens through which to see the world. Iraq as a way of breaking down these sort of levels of armor of ego that you put around yourself, perhaps that I'd grown up and formed, for various reasons, and then to have the time to reflect that you've been a part of a system that had destabilized a country, a culture, and a region. There was a whole series of events that led up to seeing, for a certain couple of examples of the worst kind of exploitation that you can see for an animal. And of course, seeing an elephant with its face cut off, an animal the size of a truck, killed for something you can hold in one hand, these tusks sold into an international market in Asia. yeah, it was definitely something very confrontational for me, and something that made me want to change my life. That wasn't a singular incident. It was a bunch of incidents. That was just part of the final straw.
Yeah. And then at what point did you decide to move away from the traditional male anti-poaching units into, evolving it to involve women and begin Akushinga?
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course, when I came over, it was at a time when the conservation industry was becoming increasingly militarized. And that was a result of desperation. The rhino wars were starting to escalate. So you're seeing rhinos that were coming into greater demand for these black market and organized crime networks. An animal that can have 10, 15 kilos of horn on its snout, with horn selling for up to $75,000 a kilo, or around $100,000 a kilo. Got an animal the size of an animal that should, running around in an area the size of a small country that should be locked in a safe. And when you come over and you're a hammer, everything's a nail. I came over with this military background, and it just seemed like a natural cadence for me to fall into with the conservation industry. Rangers that needed this certain level of training to be able to go out and defend these animals that were being hunted in these very militarized tactics. And so that's what we did in the beginning. We were a service provider to go out and train rangers for other parks, national parks, private organizations, other non-for-profit organizations. And we had a very strong focus on heavy-handed law enforcement and militarized or paramilitarized style training for rangers. And we became very successful at that. The reality is, though, that the strategy that we were using was extremely antagonistic towards local Indigenous communities, because these communities surrounded the areas that we were trying to protect. So whilst we were very successful at protecting the animals that we set out to protect, the sustainability of these programs was not long-term, because we were essentially replicating the mistakes that we'd made in Iraq. And Iraq was a replication of other militarized invasion mistakes that have been made throughout history. And the lesson to take away from that is that you cannot have an occupying force that has a long-term good relationship with the local populations. And if you can't do that, then you're just going to pour money into a foregone, failed solution. As long as you're there occupying that. We've seen it in Afghanistan. Our recent examples is just a replication of many similar examples in Afghanistan, as it was in Iraq. And when you're bringing in a person like myself, who hires an outside force to come in and protect a wilderness area from the local population, it's exactly the same mistake that's being replicated. So I would go to bed at night knowing that the mistakes we were replicating here were the same mistakes that I'd been a part of in my past, and trying to figure out what a new solution was. And we'd seen other industries that were getting ahead by getting more women into management positions, more women on the boards, more women as CEOs. I'd even seen examples with the military in Iraq and Afghanistan, where all-female counterinsurgency teams were being used to go in and negotiate with traditional leaders, because the trust system with men and all male units had been completely broken or destroyed. And from what I was reading, there was a different value system there with women, either in the military or in law enforcement, when it came to dealing with local communities. And ultimately, the only winning ingredient in fighting an insurgency, and an insurgency or a guerrilla war is when you have an occupying force that is trying to work within the local population. And an insurgency is something that blends into and comes from the local population. The only way to win that is to win the hearts and minds of that population. And we, from my studies were that women were far better at being able to achieve this than the antagonistic approach some, not all men do, when they have a weapon in their hand and a uniform on. And we've seen, particularly in Australia, it only takes a very small group within a much larger group to stain the reputation of an entire, not only an entire unit, an entire, and I wanted to try, what would happen if we put women into the forefront of law enforcement and conservation. We looked at other examples where women were given certain access to roles in conservation, but the reality is that they were outnumbered at a ratio of around 100 to 1 in frontline positions. And we wanted to create a role where women fulfilled 100% of these frontline positions. And I wanted to be able to measure the impact and the results. We then also found in our research that there was an overwhelming body of evidence that told us empowering women was the single greatest force for positive change, not only in rural Africa, but in the world. And so we thought, well, if we're putting women into these paid roles of conservation, and they're not only perhaps changing the face of law enforcement and conservation, but perhaps we can achieve social development at the same time by these women receiving a paycheck instead of being stuck in these non-paying roles that they were fulfilling in society. And I mean, for 4.5 years later, we've completely changed the way that we operate in conservation. We've created a new system and a new model, but we've also understood that conservation is not a conservation issue. It is a social issue. And when you deal with the social sides in the regions that we are working in, you have a conservation outcome. And I think that for us was a really important component. And centralizing our strategy around women's empowerment, it gave us the greatest leverage in community development. And that development in those communities made conservation so much easier.
Yeah, and I was going to say you're almost sort of coming up towards the 5-year mark, and so I've heard some of the amazing stories and highlights you've mentioned before about the success of this unit. So would you like to share a little bit of that, the differences you've noticed, the impacts they've made?
Yeah, we started a small, let's call it a trial, in a landlocked country in sub-Saharan Africa, in Zimbabwe, in August 2017, with a group of 16 women protecting 90,000 acres on a continent that's had a 700% increase in armed conflict in the last decade, in an industry that was becoming increasingly antagonistic with local indigenous communities. All we did was shifted the male roles to construction labor and put women into the power roles of law enforcement, decision making, and management. In doing so, we completely de-escalated tension with local communities. We brought conservation and communities back together. Women became that bridge that conservation communities had to rebuild. We cut our core operating costs in law enforcement by 2/3. The first third that is invested in women became the most effective form of community development funding. The other 2/3 we reinvested into social development, into healthcare, education, infrastructure, water sanitation, and in doing all this, we became more effective at conservation than ever before. We scaled the operation from one reserve of 90,000 acres to 16 women to a staff of almost 300 in Zimbabwe now, protecting 8 reserves and 1.3 million acres. We've now expanded the program into two other surrounding countries, with a property portfolio under management in conjunction with local indigenous communities, with contracts that range from 20 to 45 years. One of the largest land portfolios in Southern Africa. And we are on target to achieve our goal of protecting 20 million acres by 2026, and having a staff of 1,000 people doing that. We've changed the face of conservation. We've brought a new model to law enforcement, and we are now helping other organisations in other countries replicate this model. We've achieved an almost 90% reduction in elephant poaching across our initial region, in the mid to lower Zambezi Valley, Zimbabwe, an area that had lost 8,000 elephants between 2001 and 2016, 40% of its elephant population, and being able to help play a role in turning that poaching around with our efforts inside the reserves that we operate, in the communities that surround those areas, and also with our special investigations across the region. And at the same time, seen an almost 400% increase in wildlife populations throughout the area. So, I mean, that's the high level. That's the high level sort of summary. When you drill down into the personal lives of the women that we recruit, they come from backgrounds of being survivors in serious sexual assault, domestic violence, aged orphans, single mothers and abandoned wives. These are women that have played a role in socially re-engineering the communities that they came from, communities that they were oppressed, communities in Zimbabwe, which when I arrived had the lowest life expectancy in the world for a woman, which was less than 40 years of age. And many of these women now, within 18 months of being within the program, have bought their own land, built their own house, have become leaders in these communities. They've gotten their children back into school. They've been able to get their siblings back into school. They've been able to get healthcare for their parents, and they're really demonstrating the potential of what women should be doing if they just give them one thing, and that is an opportunity. And that's really all that these women were given. They were given zero concessions. The standards that we put them through, the selection, the phases that we put them through were harder than what we'd put them in through, because in the eyes of everyone, almost, they had far more to prove, because it was women doing a traditionally male role in a patriarchal society, in a male-dominated industry, and seeing the turnaround in a fairly short space of time in these communities and with these women's lives, something that I'm very proud of, but something that has made our job, our core business of conservation, so much more effective. And I do say this, and I don't say it lightly, because it may be perceived wrongly, but we're actually not a women's empowerment organisation. We're a conservation organisation. We just found a better way to do business.
Yeah, the results are incredible, and they absolutely speak for themselves. And like you said, that's, other organizations are now looking to your model to, have the same impact in what they're doing, which is fantastic. And so
I suppose that's the best form of flattery, I suppose, is when you're being asked to help replicate the system. And that's, it's for us, it's fantastic. On the ground, the results, they speak for themselves. So, why not replicate it?
Yeah. And you mentioned before about, that sort of grueling selection process. Like once they have become a ranger in your programs, what's like the average day of a ranger look like?
Yeah, look, a ranger is also a glamorous but thankless job. They're operating out in the middle of nowhere, working on behalf of a global community. It's very dangerous. They're operating in remote and hostile locations, patrolling 20, 30 kilometres a day. And the biggest threat they often face is not necessarily the armed poachers they're trying to stop. It's the very animals they're trying to protect. Dangerous animals like elephant, leopard, lion, buffalo. This is the irony of what they do on a daily basis, and there's no set pattern, because we try not to set a pattern. When you set a pattern, you create vulnerabilities, which poachers can exploit, because they see where you're going to be and what you're doing, whether it be in the equipment you use, the times that you leave, the times you get back, the distances you travel, the areas you go, the species you're following. So we try and irregulate what we do. That is the standard within military and law enforcement operations, is not to create that predictability. But there's reactions. There might be an animal stuck in a snare that needs to be freed. It might be elephants raiding crops in the local communities. It may be a lecture in a local school. it might just be a normal patrol, a normal 4-hour patrol from camp or from one of the remote bases. It may be an extended patrol where the women with their backpacks are going out into the bush armed for up to 5 days at a time, patrolling extended periods, collecting data along their routes of where they're going, what they're seeing, tracks they're crossing of poachers, of animals, following those tracks to see what they lead to, reporting everything back to base. And so, yeah, it's there's a fair bit of dynamic change on a day-to-day operation, just based on what these rangers are seeing and doing, and the responses that we have to implement based on those observations. But it's the unfortunate reality is we have to have armed rangers that are out there protecting these animals in these areas. And I wish they didn't have to be armed, and I wish the world was a different place, but this is the world we've created for ourselves to manage. But I will say the women, in the way that they operate, they seem far more geared towards reducing antagonism in the face of a confrontation than escalating that situation. And in the more than 300 arrests that the women of Akushinga have made, helping to drive these downturns in poaching, there's only been shots fired once. And that is a very different dynamic to what we have been used to in the way that we operate, and our experience with working with men. This is a man bashing exercise, and it's not an anti-men movement. We still employ a lot of men in a lot of different positions and key positions within the organisation. Just saying, from science, build a career across 2 decades and 3 continents in law enforcement and military operations, and have trained thousands of men, that there is a very different dynamic with women. And we had a blank canvas to work on in terms of putting women at the forefront of conservation, because the areas that we took over, they were law enforcement and conservation had failed, and there was no one operating in these areas. So we had the ability to come in and say, well, what happens if we start these operations with a workforce of 100% women, minus the male instructors we had to bring in, because women hadn't had the opportunity to gain the capacity to achieve those positions yet. We've built that over the past years. But what would happen if we put women into the forefront of law enforcement? And I can say, being able to do that does change the dynamics of society in a way that I hadn't seen before. And when you're trying to have a relationship with communities that outnumber you in the tens of thousands, you're trying to protect an area the size of a small country, there is something much more important than this muscles, this brawn, this biceps and bullets in law enforcement, and this heavy-handed approach. And that is relationships, building relationships with local communities.
And how has your role over the years changed? Like, I can imagine, initially it was a lot of on the ground getting everything started. And then, like you said, you sort of moved into, bringing about knowledge across the world about your organisation.
I've just put on about 50 kilos now, and I just hang around in a hammock most days, smoking cigars. No. Well, I would love to be out of work one day, just knowing that the natural world was being taken care of. I like to think that there's a greater priority from a global perspective being placed on the importance of nature, particularly as a self-regulating system for the planet, when we're looking at such global issues like climate change and pandemics, at a time when civilization's been brought to its knees over the last couple of years as a result of a pandemic, which is directly attributed to the way we treat nature. But the reality is that there's always going to be a threat against nature. I'd like to think that this massive ship is slowly turning around and pointing in the right direction. My role has gone from being very much, I'd say, hands-on and out there on a daily basis, training rangers, to having a foot or a toe in operations, but having scaled the organisation to such a level. We've got a brilliant management team that operates internationally, be through logistical support and administration to management on the ground, from a continent-wide standpoint right down to country and regional level. And so being able to work regularly with this team and be able to implement change in what I still describe as a fairly nimble organisation, and being able to make change and experiment with ideas without too much bureaucracy internally. I'm happy with that structure. I'm really proud of the team. I do sort of sit, I suppose, at a different level now, not so much in the weeds, but at a position where I can have a greater perspective on the vision and direction and strategy of the organisation, and being able to guide and work with that management team, but also to be able to work externally outwards to a global community from a messaging standpoint, and to be able to help create and motivate change in relation to the importance of nature. And that does involve a lot of travel, speaking with audiences around the world. I wear a hat for National Geographic as one of the speakers on the Live Bureau, where I travel around generally North America, and speaking to audiences of up to 2,500 people at a time. So being able to travel around and get that message out is also a very important part of, I think, not only from an organisational standpoint, but from a personal standpoint as well.
And I know as well you've got some involvement in other organisations, Conservation Guardians, and I know that you have different members of other organisations on your board, like in advisory positions. I'm guessing you work quite closely to share that knowledge and experience and raise the awareness and funds.
And I mean, conservation can be an extremely pointy-elbowed space. A lot of people vying for what is a very small pool of money. It is a very small sector within philanthropy, which I think is incorrect. Based on what I said before about our current position as a global civilization, as a community, and the importance that we do need to focus on nature. There does need to be some more balance in nature conservation, towards protecting animals, towards protecting the environment. In the United States, where the biggest philanthropic market in the world, this sector for religion is 10 times the size of what it is for conservation or environment. And so it's like, we're putting all this money and focus into something we can't even see or touch, something that we believe in. And we've got this miracle on Earth, this one backyard that's evolved over billions of years, and we're destroying it. And if we don't look after that, then we're actually the endangered species. And we better hope there's something in the afterlife, because this one's going to be fucked. So just having some balance in that respect is it's going to be critical to where we go and what we do with ourselves as a species, and most importantly, what we take with us along the way.
And do you have, I guess, would you say, you have fears for the future, or do you think we are moving towards the right direction with conservation?
Look, I really believe that humans are capable of amazing things when we push far enough into a corner, and when we accept our position. And I do feel that we have been pushed into that corner. I just hope that we accept our current status. I'm really optimistic about these changes. And look, if I didn't think there was a fight worth fighting for, I wouldn't be here. But look, you turn on the news, the place is burning, it's on fire, it's heating up, it's flooding, there's cyclones, there's pandemics. There's never been a more exciting time to be alive and be involved with trying to make change at scale, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to take on some of the largest land portfolios and protect biodiversity. on the continent, and to be a part of these teams, it's extremely exciting to be a part of change and be a positive force in this movement. So yeah, look, it's very easy to take a fatalist mindset and just give up and say, oh, everything's fucked. But the reality is, we've got a fight in our hands. Let's have it.
Did COVID, obviously COVID had an impact in terms of people's ability to financially support your organisation, but in terms of, injecting money into tourism and things like that, has that had a big impact on, your organisation or the wildlife itself?
Look, I think people, we've been really good at articulating the science of what we do, and we have an amazing scientific team, and being able to relay those results to an international community. As an organisation that hasn't relied on tourism, but has been able to fill the gap on behalf of other organisations that have suffered because of a downturn in tourism. The effectiveness of what we do, the ability to scale, and to be able to be very strategic with limited funds in achieving big results, has really helped us over the last couple of years, at a time when many organisations have gone out of business. In the last 24 months, we've achieved a 900% increase in income. And so, that's down to a team, not only a team on the ground that is been excellent at executing their mission, but down to also this huge mechanism behind the tip of the spear, this administrative, logistical and fundraising team. We're at a position now. Last year we just raised $9 million US. It's probably in the vicinity of about 13 million Australian dollars, 13 or 14 million Australian dollars, which is needed as we go into take on such massive landscape scale projects in new countries. And our example in Mozambique takes us into coastal and maritime conservation as well. So extending out beyond terrestrial conservation and into the water to where I came from with my background and upbringing. That's extremely exciting for us. So yeah, it's been a challenging environment, but hats off to our team for being able to be able to move and mobilize in what has been a very challenging world to raise funds in, and a challenging place to do business in Africa and on the ground.
Yeah. How do you link, how do you get people to understand the link between conservation and veganism?
I like to beat it into them.
Into submission, I understand.
Because it can be very hard to get the message across sometimes. No, I'm being facetious. Look, there's, I'm pretty blunt with the messaging, just because I don't like to beat around the bush. I'll happily get up and draw criticism at conferences and say, that, the 9 to 5 conservationists just don't like to take their work home. Those that choose not to embrace a vegan or a plant-based lifestyle, it's really it's a position that I used to be in. It's a position of hypocrisy with people that signed up for an industry that is there to protect animals and to protect nature. And so when we are supporting a meat industry, we're responsible for an industry that kills more animals than anything else on the planet. And is responsible for the degradation of more of the natural world than anything else. Land that's cleared to graze animals for agriculture and for our consumption, or to grow grain or food to feed these crops, in a conversion rate that just doesn't stack up. 17 kilograms of plant protein to produce 1 kilogram of meat protein. It's like me giving you $17 and asking for $1 back. It just doesn't stack up. And look, some people will change overnight. Some people will take a decade to change. Some people will never change. But the important thing for us in our movement is to keep having the conversations and to keep getting better at them, because the truth is accumulative. We are dealing with people that in conservation that can be very practical, and a science-based mindset. And I think when we start to and repetitively hear the science behind this industry, it becomes harder to continuously deny. Unless we're a person that's really great at suppressing our conscious or that internal voice. It's really hard to stop listening to that. And for me, it just became impossible to look at myself in the mirror and say that I wasn't being a hypocrite when I'm getting up on stage around the world asking people to protect animals, and coming home and putting another group of animals on the fire.
Was that an overnight change for you, or something that took a while to accept?
No, I accepted it from a very early stage, but in typical human fashion, became very expert at creating excuses that would continue to facilitate a convenience for myself. And everything from like, oh well, I'm doing all this work to protect this group of animals. I've sort of earned the right to protect these groups, to eat these groups, exploit these groups. Chickens and cows aren't going extinct. Then why does it really matter? These animals are bred for our consumption. The reality was, and the final acknowledgement was, that there's no difference in the capacity of a cow to suffer to a rhino, or to a chicken, or to a human. And the only difference is the capacity that we create in our own minds and allow ourselves to accept. And that for me was the final straw. And look, I'm an alpha male. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I sit in a position in society where I should be helping to protect and create systems to protect the vulnerable. Animals sit at the top of that list. So as an alpha male and someone that has the capacity to help to protect the vulnerable, why would I want to exploit something that is so vulnerable? And especially, why would I want to pay someone else to do the dirty work for me?
And how long ago was it that you went vegan?
I went, it was about 2019, or late 2012, I went vegetarian. And then in 2013, I went vegan. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm perfect. And often I think the perfection standards that are expected within our industry, also within our movement of being plant-based or veganism, can also be our worst enemy, and just scare people off even trying it or being there in the first place. Because look, we're all human beings and we do make mistakes. I won't say I've ever eaten meat since I stopped. I've never gone back and touched meat, but I've had eggs, and I've slipped and had cheese over the years, but I've also acknowledged those mistakes, and I'm happy to talk about them, because again, I'm human, and it's when you have this almost draconian, this militarized mindset on being perfect. It doesn't matter. Whatever we're talking about, whatever change we want to affect in life, if we expect perfectionism, then it's almost like we're not even going to try it in the first place, because no one's perfect. And so, it's like anything in life. It's a constant strive for personal evolution and to be a better person at whatever we do. And for me, that was my diet and lifestyle and philosophy. And it's the single most significant change that I've made in my life, and the single most important thing that's bled into everything else that I do, in the way that I see the world and see animals and experience compassion and empathy. And when you're coming at life and business and relationships from that standpoint, it is a very different perspective.
Mm. And what advice would you have for people that, want to make a difference in this world for animals at any level, whether it be, in terms of farmed animals, large scale conservation like you're doing? Like, what would you recommend or give advice?
Definitely worry about the things you can change, not the things you can't, because it can seem daunting. The issues we face are global. And look, let's look internally, look at ourselves first. What changes can we make as individuals, as human beings, in our households, in our communities, and then use that as a platform to work out and create bigger change. And as I said earlier, When you've made the change, keep having your conversations, keep talking about them, keep getting better at those conversations. We are all marketing or messaging machines for a better world, and the best way to create those messages is through the examples that we set, and to lead by example. And I'd say, this has definitely been something that I've felt has been a powerful impact for others, because the changes that I've made in my life have been able to give me a voice with which to talk about those changes, and I can speak to someone, I suppose, from a very different position to many others, and probably a demographic that is very hard to get through to, because of the background that I come from being the hunter, from being the sniper, from being this macho, ego-driven male to where I'd like to think I am now, so having turned 180 degrees, but still being able to have the voice and speak to the person that I used to be. And so we've all got a different differing levels of potential in who we can speak to, but the important thing is self-change, then being able to use those examples and experience to create bigger change.
And how can we support your work from, a lot of my listeners are Australian, but also across the world from other countries? What can we do to help you?
Look, I mean, we're a not-for-profit organisation, so of course donations go a long way. It allows us to implement our strategic plan, which is sort of fairly set in stone and has been developed by an internal team and a team of external advisors and subject matter experts. So rather than have people come in and try to push funding in a certain direction, being able to be able to support financially what we've already set in stone is a great help for us. We do have various experts that do come out and fit within our existing systems. We try to build and employ most of the capacity from a local and Indigenous level in the countries and communities that we work in. And so for that reason, we have a very, very, very small number of international experts that are working on the ground in Africa. And the rest is local expertise that we have found or created. And of course, not only a support for our organisation, but other organisations that you research well, that are doing good work. And then again, as I said, back to that personal level, changes that we can make in our own lives are as important as anything that people could do in support of our work.
Would you have ever said that you would think this would have been your future? Like looking back, the young, 19-year-old you were saying that was, going into Australian military and things. Do you think this would have been? Could you have seen this in your future?
I grew up with a I suppose this sort of capitalist mindset, and I had sort of these visions of myself being a CEO of a big company that made lots of money, and sitting in the boardroom, and I don't know why. When I was building a property portfolio, it was almost like a competition with other people in the real estate space to say how many houses you owned and how much you were worth. And I'm still seeing. I've been part of a team in an organisation that's built a property portfolio. They're just wilderness areas, not houses. And I am the CEO of quite a large organisation now, with well over 300 employees and growing fast, and is doing very well financially. It's just all for completely different reasons. And when we do well as an organisation, it doesn't mean I get a pay rise or a fancier car or a nicer suit or a better holiday at the end of the year. It just means we get to expand and scale our work and our results, and that for me is achieving a far greater or more important mission now than anything I dreamed of previously. It's protecting nature, it's protecting our future, it's working with and developing local communities, the individuals that come from and the wildlife that they live around, and that is a far greater purpose or mission than anything I'd envisaged at any stage in my life, and something I'm grateful to have found.
And is there anything, in the future, whether it be IEPF related or on a personal level, that you wanted to share?
We've recently formed an alliance with a small group of other organisations called the Conservation Landscape Alliance, which is a sort of a side project of mine until it goes live, which will be very soon. And it's a group of organisations that are focused on working with local Indigenous communities to achieve conservation at scale, and the acquisition in partnership of land portfolios with local communities to help those communities protect areas that are far greater than any one park alone, or far more important from a biodiversity level than any single species. And these are some of the most ambitious conservation aspirations in the world. So yeah, I do look forward to talking more about that. And then just from a personal level, just I'm in a very, very good place, enjoying what I do, passionate about what I do. I have the most elusive thing in life, which is purpose. We comfortably growing as an organisation, and just feeling a really good space too. And I've done the more than a decade of hard yards of doing the 18-hour days, doing every single job, to being able to sit back now and just help work with a team that can take on so much of the responsibility that we have, and not, it just gives you more thinking space as well. When you're not down there every day just grinding, and there's just that constant stack of work on your desk that you think you'll never get through. My advice to people that feel as though they're in that position is to just keep at the grind, just stay in the game, because perseverance is the single greatest key to succeeding over everything else. It's just staying in the game.
Yeah. And is there anything that we might have missed, Damien, before we wrap up? Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
I think I've got through a really good deal of information here, and there's a bunch of media there is out there on the work that we do. There was a documentary done by National Geographic in conjunction with Academy Award-winning director James Cameron. There's several segments on 60 Minutes, BBC, Al Jazeera, that people can get on and have some more visual context to what we do and the people and some of the interviews with the women. So yeah, just jump on, and I might sound lazy here, just get on and Google some of those articles. Akushinga is the name of the program, and just have that, be able to learn more. And of course, we're grateful for any support. But and thank you for having me on today.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I'll share a lot of that content. I'll put that in the episode notes so that people can easily find it, have a link to them and see what you guys do visually, like you said, which is awesome. And I guess wanted to note that, you mentioned before about getting the conservation crowd or environmentalists to understand, their personal impact. And I can definitely say that's something extremely successful you did in my personal life. At the time I was, I'd studied environmental science, and it was just one comment you said to me at the end of our last conversation. You said to me that conservation is a full-time job, not a part-time commitment. And that was that's all you said to me. And overnight I went vegan. So you definitely have that impact, Damien. So please keep sharing that message, because it has a huge impact on people's lives.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's always good to hear about that impact. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And do you happen to have a favorite quote that you'd like to share to finish up, Damien?
I've always been a fan of Martin Luther King and his constant struggle towards justice. And the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that that sort of signifies the struggle that we are going through, not only in the fight for animals, but the fight for nature. And I do think we're on the right path, but it is a long and arduous struggle. And we need people that are part of this fight, and because it is what is right, and it is what is just. And I suppose that is something that I do like fighting for, and being part of that struggle, and that is what is just.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, not just personally from myself, but I'm sure from everyone that listens to this and across Australia, we're extremely proud of everything you're doing. And thanks to your organisation, everyone that's involved, we really appreciate all your hard work and commitment.
Awesome, Alicia. Thank you so much. So thank you for your work and for having me on today, and for getting this message out there.
Thank you.